Tom Pelissero now joins us, NFL insider from NFL Network. Obviously, the big news this morning was Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco getting let go after their huge loss to the Raiders. Let's just look at the other sideline because we already know that news. Did the win last night secure the job for Antonio Pierce?
I don't think it secured the job. I mean, coming off especially a really, really disappointing type of a game. I do know, we had Max Crosby on the Insiders last week, and he's been effusive in his praise of Antonio Pierce. Certainly there are players that like him a lot. Mark Davis is inclined, just based upon the personality traits and the fact that he's a Raider and all those things, to give Antonio Pierce a real look. But the Raiders' job is potentially very attractive as well. They have to go through a search process no matter what. They can't just hand it, even though Antonio Pierce is a minority, they can't just hand it to him. You have to run a process. You have to do an external search. So they will have to go through that. Look through Mark Davis's track record here. He's always gone since he took over for his dad after the big fish, whether it was bringing back John Gruden, bringing in Josh McDaniels, even though, at the time he brought in McDaniels, they had just made another run with a temporary coach in Rich Bisaccia, and they got into the playoffs that year. If Antonio Pierce does the same thing, it certainly becomes more possible. And they are, amazingly enough, hovering on the edge of the playoff picture at this point. But, you're 6-8. You've had highs and lows. You've had some inconsistencies. I give Antonio Pierce credit for, I did a story on this on Sunday, bringing in a bunch of former coaches. You saw Marvin Lewis last night's there in Raiders gear. Pierce played for him. Tom Coughlin, those two talk like every morning, first thing about the schedule and everything that's going on. Tom was in the building last week. Adam Gase was in the building last week because he's close with the offensive coordinator, Bo Hardegree. He's trying to learn on the job. He's not just trying to win a couple of games here. Is it enough? There's not a ton of precedent for hiring a head coach who's been an NFL linebackers coach for 2 years and held a variety of roles over a handful of years at the college level. But Antonio Pierce also has something that not a lot of NFL coaches do, which is strong track record as a player. He's been a Super Bowl champion. He's obviously got juice. You can tell that right away. It's going to be fascinating to see how Mark Davis plays this thing out, especially because the last time that he moved on from interim coach, obviously the results didn't improve.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the Spanoses and Mark Davis, two of the harder to read coaches or owners in the NFL. So this makes it even that much more complicated. But you have to wonder that Antonio Pierce seems to have the guys in the locker room who are loving him, loving playing for him. And Mark Davis loves these big splashy wins like he had last night.
You could see it. I mean, he looked giddy, Suzy. If you watched him like in the box after that crazy pick six that Jack Jones had, and he's going like Home Alone style. Like, I can't believe what I'm witnessing right here.
Like with the 7 bottles of water in front of him, I believe.
Water, right? Mark is listen. Mark's about one thing: is he wants to win. And I talked to him briefly at the owners' meetings. Like, all he cares about is winning. He won back-to-back WNBA titles, which he's really proud of with his aces. He's trying to get it right with the Raiders. Does he feel like these guys who, remember, it's not like he was, fired Josh McDaniels at the time because he wanted to install Antonio Pierce. He just knew he wanted Josh out of the building and then just talked to a bunch of people like, who do I hire now? He landed on Antonio Pierce. And there certainly are guys, some of those important players like a Max Crosby, who've spoken up. But again, you still have to figure out, is this sustainable? Much like we've talked about with some of these young quarterbacks and backup quarterbacks that have stepped in, and holy cow, Josh Dobbs is great for 2 games. Wow, Tommy DeVito's lighting it up. Is a way different thing between 1, 2, 3 games and actually doing it for a full season. We've seen the best with Antonio Pierce as the interim coach. That was last night against, granted, a Chargers team with a backup quarterback making his first NFL start. We've also seen them get shut out 3-0 at home in a completely lifeless environment. Which one is it? They got 3 more games to show them.
You mentioned the owners' meetings. What was the most interesting thing that happened down there?
I thought the most interesting thing was some of the rules discussions, and specifically the way that NFL officials, including Roger Goodell, spoke about them. With regard to the hip drop tackle, Goodell flat out said what we'd all been told, which was, we want to get it out of the game. And they're coming up with ways to define it. They've seen too many injuries. The fact that Tyreek Hill got hurt on Monday night on a hip drop tackle, literally as owners were arriving, that was one more point that they could hammer home on top of Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson and some of the other guys who have gotten hurt on that tackle. We also heard Troy Vincent, who's the head of the football operations and is heavily involved in officiating and rules, speak up and say, in essence, we don't want to ban the tush push. The Eagles do it better than everyone else. That's not a reason to ban something. They don't have any type of data that's sufficient enough to say it's more dangerous than other plays. So it sounds like that may survive. And then with regard to the kickoff, you heard Troy Vincent say it's a dead ceremonial play now, which is kind of what they were going for when last year they instituted the rule where you could fair catch the ball inside, your 25-yard line, get the ball brought out. They knew that returns were going to go way down. Now they're using that very data to say, listen, returns are way too far down. We can't just go on like this with a non-competitive play, which we've heard that phrase before, back when they moved the extra point to where it is now, as opposed to from the 2-3 yard line. That was because, we can't have a non-competitive play. Kickoffs are now a non-competitive play. So Vincent said they're going to convene a committee of head coaches and special teams coordinators. And they've been discussing this for years and years, but they want to come up with alternatives. And it might take something really bold that's not a kickoff looking play to supplant this. Otherwise, 5 years from now, instead of having a dead ceremonial play, we'll just spot the ball at the 25-yard line like you're playing pickup on Thanksgiving Day and go from there.
How about Chris Brockman's favorite, the fumble through the end zone?
Brockman, by the way, TJ, all the boys in studio. What's up, guys?
Well,
Say hello.
Tom. How you doing, Tom?
Love you guys. Suzy comes right in. It's like the first question, just bang, immediately.
I like to use a paucity of words. I don't have to spend the day like buttering you up. We can get right to it.
It's not a game.
That's always been one of my theories too about doing radio or TV, which is just start the show. You don't need to spend 5 minutes. We're gonna have it. Just start the show. So
Tom, you don't know this. My brother listens and he critiques every time I'm on. My brother Scott. Hi, Scott.
And Shuster, what up?
He'll say like, "You spent too long asking that question. Get right to it." So I hear about it on the other side of this.
No, you're very direct, and I appreciate that. The fumble through the end zone, that was another really interesting one. You're right, because you heard Troy Vincent reference maybe this is too punitive, which is the argument the people who have been in favor of changing that rule have often made, which is you could spot the ball back at, let's say, the 25 or the 40-yard line or whatever without having it become a touchback. I personally believe that 6 points being the most that you can earn on any single play, that there also needs to be a risk factor involved. If you're going to extend the football, toss it at the goal line. If you're going to get the most points you can, you also have to take on that risk that something really bad could happen. And it's also, I think, significant when you're talking about the sudden change that can happen in NFL games, that you have something that can happen down at the goal line other than a fourth down stop, a field goal, or a touchdown. So I personally think the rule should stand, but the fact that Troy Vincent is out there saying it publicly does mean that at minimum we are going to have a healthy debate on this come February and March.
2 more minutes with Tom Pelissero. How about C.J. Stroud? Is he playing?
We'll see. The Texans are going to be on the practice field shortly. Didn't practice Wednesday or Thursday. He's in the concussion protocol. That's always out of everybody's hands in terms of the timetable. But if he's not at least limited in the Friday practice, then basically the hourglass is run out and it'll be Davis Mills against the Titans.
Last question. Have to ask for personal reasons. Belichick, what's happening in New England? What are you hearing?
I know there were reports earlier this week about whether a decision had been made, and the same reports also saying that decision could still change. What I know as we sit here right now, Suzy, is there's not been that big conversation between Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick where they finalize exactly what is going to take place. It's hard to envision a world, as Al Michaels referenced on a broadcast a couple of weeks ago, where Robert Kraft flat out fires Bill Belichick. So could you be in a scenario where there is a trade? Could there potentially even be a reassignment, which seems less likely because by all indications, Bill Belichick wants to continue to coach, wants to continue to pursue records. They've got 3 weeks to figure it out. You would think with a lot of coaches, if you were in this spot, you would make decisions and make an announcement or get the news out and let it be the great goodbye tour. Bill Belichick is also not somebody who probably is apt to embrace a scenario like that. And so, this reminds me back of Andy Reid's final year in Philadelphia, where the season was just kind of getting away from him after a very long period of success there. It ended with Andy Reid, I think it was the day after the season, in the cafeteria, giving a goodbye to all the staff members, and they're cheering him on the way out the door. And listen, it worked. They end up, after the Chip Kelly experiment, they end up with Doug Peterson. They win a Super Bowl. Now they got Nick Sirianni, and he's going to a Super Bowl. And you've got the Chiefs who, have won a couple under Andy Reid. Bill Belichick based on the fact that he's 71, 72 years old, probably doesn't have as long here, that he's still going to be going after it. But once again, by all indications, Bill Belichick wants to continue to coach. So if in fact the Krafts make the decision that they're going separate ways, there's different ways this could play out beyond the normal Black Monday firing.
Okay, I lied. One more question. What are we not talking about that you think is interesting out there that we're not hitting?
Well, I would say this, just in terms of, the potential other openings. Obviously, we're micro-focused on the Chargers right now, but there's so much at stake over these next 3-4 weeks here for a lot of different coaches and GMs in the NFL. And part of the reason we have such a muddled picture as we sit here in mid-December is there's only two teams that are eliminated from playoff contention. It's the Patriots and the Panthers. Everybody else is still technically alive at this point, which a lot of times can slow down the decision-making process. When they went to the extra playoff team, when they went to the 17th game, and there was a lot of discussion about, this is going to water down the product. The season's getting too long. You're going to have teams getting in with 500 or losing records. The NFL stance, and I agree with it, is basically, look how many more fan bases are engaged right now. Under the old rules, shorter season, you'd have 2 games left. You'd have 1 fewer playoff spot. 7-6 would be the cutoff in the NFC. Right now, it's 6-7. I'm not saying that we want to watch a team that goes 7-10, 8-9, get into the playoffs, but with regard to everybody playing meaningful football outside of a couple of teams down the stretch here, that part of it has worked, and it's going to be bananas, Suzy, over the next few weeks here when you look at all the different playoff scenarios and how this could play out.
No, you're not wrong. Thank you so much for your time. Go back to work. I know that we get you in between live shots. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.